Rizoli, and welcome to Framingham's Historical Video Memories.
Hello and welcome to the Framingham Historical Society Museum. I'm Chris Walsh, the Society President. I'm standing in front of the Academy building, which is home of our Historic Society and our museum. The original building on this site was a brick schoolhouse built in 1792. This building replaced it in 1859, and it's a very unusual structure. It's a Greek Revival structure built out of rubble stone. Back in the early days, school children, when they came to school, their parents actually paid the schoolmaster directly. It was only in the wintertime that students came to school because during the summertime they spent so much time working and were needed around the house. But anyway, come on into the museum and let us show you our collection. Do, if you are able to, come by sometime and visit it in person. Thank you very much. Hi, we're down on the lowest floor of the Academy Museum. In this section, we really deal with events of the 1700s and before. That's essentially the 18th century. We're starting off in this corner, which is prehistory to the Europeans. Framingham was home to a large population of Native Americans. Nipmunks was the chief tribe in the area that ranged from Rhode Island up to beyond Boston. When the colonists first came to the Plymouth colony in Plymouth, the Indians that met them there were Nipmunks. Metacomet was the Indian chief at the time and helped the colonists establish the colony. In this area, we're showing some of the earliest things that people have found here. A wide range of stones, implements, a beautiful model of a canoe that Native Americans made to show how canoes were made. Some of the more interesting pieces here is a very, very long pestle and a lot of stone axe heads. One of the things that I like to point out in any tour of the basement here is that before the colonists came, the Native Americans lacked, to a certain extent, metal. And in making the various things, like this canoe, they used the implements that you see here. Note that the construction of the canoe is all made out of the very, very light pieces of wood. The Native Americans did not have any what we would call permanent settlements. And in fact, they did not even recognize land rights except in certain sort of territorial areas. But you can see that the types of things like this basket and the small little Indian basket here with its fine needlework was indicative of the way they built everything. When the colonists came, they brought with them metal. And the metal allowed them to saw down the larger trees in the area. I'd like to show the difference between this canoe, the construction of this canoe, and the construction of this building here. You see the large pieces of timber that this building is made out of, hand-hewed in some cases, and in other cases water sawn. This is really a telling difference between the two societies and why the two societies came into a great deal of conflict. The Native Americans building in this very, very light fashion, not really ever staying in one place as in terms of a permanent building. When the colonists came in using their axes and their saws and putting in these buildings that weren't going anywhere, they felt the need to actually have land rights. And after some time, the Indians, it became obvious to the to the Native Americans that the colonist buildings were there to stay. This created a great deal of a consternation in the Native American camp, and eventually they began to try to move the colonists back into around Boston. They were unsuccessful, and the European colonists multiplied and multiplied until virtually the Native American communities were wiped out. Leaving the Native American section and coming into this area, which deals with the early colonists, back in the 1630s, Framingham was really a wilderness area. Very few settlers had come out here, and coming out here, living on very, very secluded farms. The real issue was that a land grant had been given to Thomas Danforth in England, and it was up to him to bring people into the area. This area, which was very fertile with a lot of water, became a very popular place for settlers to come. John Stone started a mill in Saxonville early on, and people coming over from the Sudbury plantations. And very soon after that, they built their first church, which still is on the common outside today. In this area, we see some of the implements of people working in colonial times. And working in colonial times was very different from working today. Colonists virtually had to make virtually everything, from cutting down their own trees and building their own houses to making their own clothes. In this area, we see pieces of the clothing manufacture where you take the raw wool, card it, spin it, and over on my right here, the loom where you would actually make homespun cloth. Very few people could afford to import anything from Europe at this point. Everything was made here. Even in the time of the Native Americans, this area was well known for its basketry because of the huge marshes just to the east of here. And colonists picked this up also and were making baskets quite popular. Some people eventually became very good. Instead of making a wide range of these things, became fairly specialized in things like basketry. In the next section, we'll look at some of these specialties, like making shoes. We have here a shoe bench from a cobbler. Now, this cobbler that owned the shoe bench was also a soldier, a lawyer, a surveyor. He made shoes. We won't call it a hobby because it was a trade, but everyone had what we would consider a real trade back at that point. And you can see in all of these wooden laths. Now, his clients, a person back then would not go to a store and get an off-the-shelf piece of merchandise. They would go to a cobbler, and that cobbler would pick the shoe size and then actually would change that shoe lath in order to fit that person's exact foot. The person wanting a second pair of shoes some years later could go back in and get that first lath picked up and have the shoes already fit to their size. So it was a fairly different type of society. And even though these people did many, many things in terms of it, they became known for being experts in particular things. Other things just to mention here are the snowshoes. Very interesting. The issue of winter and summer. As I said a little while ago, this school was used primarily in the winter because during the summertime, children were working way too hard on farms to be spared. It was only during the down times of the winter that children could go to school and learn things that weren't directly helpful to the family's survival. Also in the wintertime, because of the downtime, and also because the roads were easier in the wintertime when the snow was packed down by successive sleds, it was easier for people to move around on some great distances going over the rivers when they're frozen and whatnot. And this is how in this country the wintertime became the holiday period, because people could visit, spend those long winter nights together, holding parties. So we have snowshoes, and we also have here ice skates, because of our rivers and lakes around here that were very popular, that would just screw on to the bottom of a pair of boots. In the next section, we'll be looking at the farm colonial kitchen. The colonial kitchen was the real heartbeat, the real center of the working house. In this display here, we have implements from colonial kitchen of the 17th century. Big hearth, major area where there was always a fire working, and the various implements that would come off of the what they call the crane. Pots could be pulled off, pulled back on. We have the nursery, would essentially, because it was really the one warm house in the room, the nursery would be in the kitchen, or there would be a room fairly open to the kitchen that would be the nursery for the young children, because of the cold in the winter time, the infant mortality was really fairly high. But here was the area where most things were made, from candles to pottery to food, were made basically in the colonial kitchen. The various, you can see back here the candle making. So we have various candle making molds and candles that have been made from back then, and a lot of the pewter pots, which at this point really were still imported. Because of the cold during the winter, which was the hardest time, oftentimes benches like this were built with high backs and with deep insets, so that people could actually face them to the fire and stay warm. From the colonial kitchen like this, we're going to move on over here and see some more of the types of implements that would have been used around in the yard. Here we have a lot of the implements from the colonial era. A cheese tub and a butter churn. When I talk to the children that come through here on various tours in terms of what life was like, I like to show the butter churn. Churning butter is a dreadfully boring job, and it was usually left to the children to do. Just pushing this up and down until it became butter. It was not a day filled with playing and just sort of running around, although there was quite a bit of that. It was usually a day of pretty hard work. We have a cheese tub for making cheese, and a different kind of churn over here. A lot of weighing equipment, sifts, a lot of implements. Here is another job, as you can see, for the older children, which is carrying water to and from the house. This is a wooden yoke that you would fit on your shoulders and carry 2 buckets. Usually the older children's first job in the morning was to start to bring in water into the kitchen to start the day's work. Down here you see apple baskets. And here, as you can see from this angle, the interesting thing about this plow is that it's sheathed in iron. The difference between what the Native Americans could do in this soil and what the colonists could do comes back again to the use of metals. Native Americans could not do any scale farming because all of their implements were either just pure stone or of wood, or of light wood. The colonists, when they were able to build things out of heavier pieces of wood and then sheathe them in iron, could actually plow the fields that were so